you all for joining us today for the PRIME webinar on human rights in business. My name is Jedediah Fix, and I'm one of the working group coordinators here at the PRIME Secretariat in New York. For those of you who are new to us, PRIME stands for the Principles of Responsible Management Education. Just a few technical notes before we get started. For privacy reasons, it may appear that you're alone on the call, but I assure you, you are not. We have 40 people signed up today from 3 continents. If you're listening from a computer, please make sure that you unmute your computer's volume control. We'll be recording this event to provide as a resource in the future. For audio control, we'll be muting all of the lines except the speakers, so we can't hear you right now. If you have technical questions, please feel free to contact us using the chat function in the lower right-hand corner of the webinar interface on your screen. For those of you experiencing poor call quality, our general recommendation is to disconnect and to sign on again. Sometimes this helps clear up the interference. We're joined today by 3 speakers. Jonas Haertle of the PRIME Secretariat in New York and the UN Global Compact, Tom Hickey of the Hess Corporation, and Anthony Ewing, Columbia Law School and Logos Consulting. After hearing from our speakers, we've scheduled a question and answer session. If you have questions for the speakers, please use the raise hand feature on the software. When the time comes, we'll unmute your line to allow you to ask your question. Alternatively, you may send us your question in the chat box so we may pose it to the speakers. We've scheduled 1 hour for this webinar, so without further delay, it's my pleasure to hand the presentation over to Jonas, who will talk about the UN Global Compact and the PRIME initiative.
Great. Thank you, Jed. And again, good morning. We were just, we had already started, so I'll say good morning again because obviously nobody could hear us in the very first trial. We are very pleased here from both the Global Compact and the PRIME Secretariat side to host this webinar. We have received a huge number of feedback and responses from people, so we are very pleased to have approximately 40 people in the call this morning. I'm also, very happy that Tom and Anthony can join us this morning here to give us some more information on this very relevant topic on business and human rights from their respective perspectives. What I want to do in the first 5 to 10 minutes of this presentation is to give you an update and some background information on both the UN Global Compact and the Principles for Responsible Management Education initiative. So, first of all, the Global Compact itself, as many of you will know and will be aware of, is the UN's, the United Nations Corporate Responsibility Initiative with the objective of creating a more sustainable and inclusive global economy. The Global Compact is based on universally accepted values in the areas of human rights, good workplace practices, environmental standards, and anti-corruption. And these areas have been translated into 10 principles that directly speak to business operations. By now, 12 years after the Global Compact was started, we count over 6,000 corporate participants that have signed up to the Global Compact principles in over 130 countries. In addition, over 4,000 non-business participants, labor unions, NGOs, and also academic institutions have joined the Global Compact. We are organized both on a global level, but also increasingly activities are being developed and offered through the over 100 Global Compact local networks in countries around the world. In 2007, the Global Compact started to engage more with the academic sector, and we launched the Principles for Responsible Management Education initiative. That initiative has the goal to encourage especially management schools and business schools to change curriculum, research, and other methods based on the UN Global Compact principles. By now, PRIME, the Principles for Responsible Management Education initiative, counts over 450 business schools and management-related academic institutions as participants in over 80 countries. You can see here on the slide the overview the regions in which participants are based. PRIME itself is based on a set of 6 principles which provided a framework for organizational change for management education institutions. So it's very similar than the setup and the approach that Global Compact is taking. It's a principle-based initiative. 2 other aspects stand out when it comes to PRIME and the value proposition for organizations to engage in PRIME and based on the 6 principles. It's increasingly that we see that number of stakeholders of business schools, such as students, business school associations, but of course also corporations, are increasingly asking business schools to incorporate sustainability efforts and corporate responsibility efforts into curriculum and research. And so we see an increased recognition of those schools that are actually engaged in PRIME for their efforts. On the other hand, over the last 5 years, we have also increasingly seen that there is that the PRIME is developing both on a global and local level learning communities, such as through working groups and different groups that provide resources, but also on a regional and global level through meetings and conferences that we organize or co-organize. One important aspect regarding resources are the reports that business schools that participate in PRIME are asked to provide on an ongoing basis in order to stay engaged in the initiative. These reports are called Sharing Information and Progress Reports, and they are publicly available on our website and increasingly provide also learning resources for other schools to learn from what's happening in individual schools in terms of implementing the PRIME principles. One other aspect are the working groups which I already referred to, and we have seen over the last 24 months in 3 issue areas, in the areas of anti-corruption, anti-poverty, and gender equality, 3 working groups that have come together. These are faculty networks, faculty from different business schools around the world, and they have in each of these areas provided a lot of, or have come together and provided and developed different resources that you can see here on this slide. So one of the ideas also for this webinar is to find out whether there is an interest from the PRIME community, but also of course from other stakeholders, as to the topic of business and human rights, and whether, when it comes to how to link that up with the business school side, there's an interest to potentially launch a PRIME working group on business and human rights. With that overview, I will now hand it over to Tom, who is actually also in our office. And maybe, Tom, you can also introduce just a little bit of your background before you start out with your own presentation. So thank you very much, and then hand it over to Tom Hickey.
Jonas, thank you very much for that introduction. Just by way of background briefly, I work for Hess Corporation here in New York. I work in the global compliance and with the Human Rights Group. I'm attorney of the England and Wales and also State Bar of California, and I do have an MBA which I completed in 2008, so this is very dear to my heart, all these subjects. First, by way of background, career with Hess, I joined Hess in 2000 from private practice in the City of London. I've had the privilege to work in London, Houston, Kuala Lumpur, and the last couple of years here in New York. Principally, I've been embedded in the upstream oil and gas division of our business, and certainly over the last 5 or 6 years, I've been very involved in developing, helping the organization develop its human rights strategy along with our human rights group here in New York. So with that, I wish everyone also a good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, given we have people on every number of continents. And also, despite that introduction, I should give a brief disclaimer that these are my own observations and really very much in support of the United Nations PRIME initiative and the Global Compact. So financial models and controls, operational and marketing strategies and management and leadership skills have really long been a feature of business training and research. However, with increasing access to information about how a company operates, We're seeing investors are recognizing the correlation between a return on their investment and the relationship a company has with its employees, suppliers, its consumers, and the local communities. Events such as community or supply disruption, politically motivated regulation, litigation, or consumer boycotts are, I think, less readily being dismissed these days as an unfortunate set of events prompted by an independent set of circumstances that are external to and beyond the organization's control. Business schools have for some time included ethics and CSR in their teaching, but typically, I think, from a legal and compliance, legal and philanthropic perspective, these are vitally important. But given today's focus is on the integration of human rights into investment analysis and operational execution, I think looking at the investment from the perspective of all those that will be affected by the business is key. Understanding what actually is important to these people, understanding that incorporating the community into planning, execution, and operation will create value, it mitigates risk, and will deliver long-term sustainable growth for the business. Business is catching up with society and investor expectations, and huge progress has been made, and the rather intangible contribution of human rights and social awareness is becoming increasingly tangible. Scenario planning, risk assessments, training and awareness do enable business to avoid, anticipate, or at least more efficiently accommodate potential disruption. Business and investors are developing techniques to analyze the rewards derived from proactive human rights and social investment. The ERM Group, just for example, is a consultancy working with companies to develop sustainability techniques and analytical tools. The International Integrated Reporting Council and the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board are also developing standard accounting and reporting practices to define the element of corporate value that is specifically derived from transparency, human rights, social responsibility, and ethical business. Dr. Jean Rogers, founder and executive director of the SASB, was quoted by the Financial Times in June of this year as saying company valuations used to be based on 80% tangible assets and 20% intangible. But now it's the other way around. Intangible assets are recognized as affecting valuations, but they are not easy to quantify. We need next-generation systems that can account for non-financial information, even if you are only interested in financial performance. Therefore, I think this quote really gets to the heart here of Principle 1 that you have on the slide in front of you, the opportunity for business and the development of future leaders with these skills in human rights. Notwithstanding the expectations of society, integration of human and social rights into business, frankly, is easier said than done. And by this I mean the following. Our conscience as honest, ethical individuals naturally compels us to do the right thing. Society at large has increasingly sophisticated and influential means to persuade organizations to do the right thing. World and regional organizations have issued conventions, declarations, compacts, and initiatives offering guidance on what it is to do the right thing. And law imposes civil and criminal penalties when people or companies fail to do the right thing. However, even if a business has made this decision to, in quotes, do the right thing and invest in human and social rights, it asks, naturally, what is doing the right thing? What are human rights and what do they actually mean to the business? How does a business integrate its understanding of human rights into its operations so that it does actually do the right thing and can demonstrate to its internal and external stakeholders that it is doing the right thing? And it's here, I think, that business schools play such a vital role. Many of your students fill influential positions across their organizations. They are thinkers, they are doers, and they are changers. Many will go on to executive positions where they will shape the future of their business and in turn its interaction with and its impact upon society. Most have heard of human rights and that they are important. Few, however, have a real understanding of what human and social rights actually are, or have the requisite knowledge to incorporate human rights into business strategy and execution. And we are seeing, as I touched on earlier, that this is becoming an increasingly critical gap. The business school is free of corporate hierarchy and limitation, and is a forum of lively debate and analysis, and is perfect for transferring knowledge and experiences for subject matter experts to future business management experts. And as such, students are in the right environment to analyze what human rights really means. They can understand why human rights are relevant to functional leaders, not just to legal or CSR specialists, but to people in finance, people in marketing, sales, IT, for example. They can verify that respect for human rights reduces operational risk, but also creates opportunity, and it delivers value to the financial bottom line. They will be able to quantify and analyze the actual value created, and they will be able to incorporate human and social rights into business processes. And why is this important? Most people have good intentions and want to do the right thing. These same people comprise a company's workforce, its suppliers, its investors, its customers and regulators. However, failure to recognize and accommodate the impact of people on business, of the business on people, can lead to significant operational disruption. Just take, for example, production shutdowns as a result of community unrest, worker unrest as a result of unsatisfactory working conditions, supply chain disruption when the media identifies a supplier using child labor, moratoria being imposed by regional or national government in response to public pressure, litigation alleging involvement in serious harm or death to people. The list can go on. The disruption and reputational impact could be temporary, or in the case of legislation, permanent. There are plenty of examples where organizations have withdrawn from a region, country, or product line because of the legal or reputational impact on the business. Whatever the consequence, such disruption does not deliver value to business or to society. Many companies now recognize, in addition to the rights granted by law to set up and operate a business, no less important is the social rights granted by the broader community, more commonly known as the license to operate. It is, in effect, an intangible, unspoken, undefined social tolerance and acceptance of the business operations. And what constitutes this license to operate is business, time, and location specific. It is continuously evolving as the company, the community, social expectations, the economy, or politics change. And frankly, as with the legal license, the greater the upfront investment, the more robust it is, and the lower the risk the business may experience. Just take 3 examples. Startup business may be embraced for offering jobs and opportunities to local community. However, the third extension to the project and corresponding increase in heavy goods traffic finally exhausts the community tolerance of noise, fumes, dust, road damage, road traffic accidents, and influx of out-of-towners, resulting in cause for closure. Another example may be a bank opens a new branch. A year later, its customers boycott the bank in response to a rising number of foreclosures and the perception it was caused by predatory lending. The allegations are actually without merit. However, had the bank invested in its relationship with and understood the perspectives of the community, it could have proactively engaged to protect the most important issues during what is actually the effect, the economic downturn, such as a roof, ensuring their consumers have a roof over their heads, education of their children. It protects the customer base and enhances the bank's long-term reputation. Just a third example. On the way to start his shift, the plant manager notices increased activity around the gates. By 10 o'clock in the morning, there is a large congregation of people. The police arrive, as does the military. The manager shuts the plant down, fearful of the integrity of the plant and safety of the people. It will take at least 24 hours to get it up and running again. How does the plant manager and his or her own supervisors respond to the protesters? Are the police trained to allow the protest to pass peacefully? Could the scenario have been avoided altogether with a more proactive focus on human and social issues? What legal risks might the company be exposed to if anyone is hurt? What is the financial and reputation cost to the business? What opportunities has the business lost by falling out with the community? So by analyzing business scenarios through the prism of human rights, these business leaders will recognize and understand the perspectives of those impacted. Students will integrate into project strategy and execution the appropriate impact assessments, training, policies, procedures, communication and monitoring. Students will be able to balance the legal rights to operate with the social license to operate. Students will see both the opportunity for risk mitigation as well as the opportunity for long-term value creation. The next slide, please. Thank you. So this is where the classroom is a forum for developing these business techniques. Students will graduate knowing what it actually means to respect human rights, and that above-ground human and social due diligence and risk analysis gives a competitive advantage to business. Delivery of a project at lower cost, fewer unseen disruptions, trusted and transparent relationships with regulators, local community and the media, prevention of corruption, enhanced reputation, customer goodwill and employee loyalty. While each deliver value to the bottom line individually, combined they offer long-term sustainability and growth. Frankly, it is tough convincing a resource-strapped executive, particularly these days, to make the investment in human and social rights strategy without a sound cost versus benefit analysis. Business school is an environment to develop bespoke accounting techniques using hypothetical projects to demonstrate the risk mitigation, lower cost base, and competitive advantage of investing in human rights. Students can also benchmark a business against its peers using techniques developed by the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, which is developing industry-specific sustainability accounting standards, or the International Integrated Reporting Council, which is developing an integrated reporting framework, combining financial, environmental, social, and governance information in a consistent and comparable format. Financial tools that capture human and social risks will enable the business to model additional economic scenarios and stress test the project. This will ensure a more robust and realistic investment decision process, and if the decision is to proceed, a more strategic and structured approach to project execution. Operational efficiency is also fundamental to long-term profitability and sustainability as competition increases and margins narrow. As we know, retrofitting plant and machinery or rebasing investor expectations are very costly. Human and social opportunities include designing appropriate working conditions, forecasting operational timelines to accommodate cultural festivities, or daily routines to respect religious expression. Supply chain procedures and due diligence to source goods and services from appropriate vendors and locations. Integrating relevant noise, odor, pollutant, or water use reduction systems into building machinery or manufacturing design. Moving on to international transactions, particularly in jurisdictions that have had a history of crimes against the person. These can be a challenge. However, if the commercial negotiator and his or her cross-functional colleagues understand the risks, the issues, the liabilities, and the opportunities, a troubled jurisdiction may offer the business a whole new opportunity that a less capable company is unable to pursue. Likewise, but looking at it from an alternate perspective, in the same way your students are or will be business leaders, many are or will be leaders in government. Frankly, the intellectual discussion within the freedom of a business school classroom lends credibility to the subject matter of human rights, and there is a greater chance students will return to their home country with a renewed sense of urgency to ensure its government respects human rights and engages with businesses that have the capability of doing the same. So for my last slide, I just wanted to touch on some specific human rights challenges facing companies today, and particularly ones that I have seen. General License 17, issued on 11 July 2012 by the Office of Foreign Asset Control at the US Department of the Treasury, authorizes new investment in Myanmar subject to certain reporting requirements that will require annual reports on human rights, worker rights, anti-corruption, and environmental policies and procedures. As far as I'm aware, General License 17 sets a precedent that I'm sure will be followed by other countries. Again, on the 22nd of August, the US Securities and Exchange Commission issued rules implementing Dodd-Frank Sections 1504 for the disclosure of payments by resource extraction issuers, and 1502, conflict minerals, disclosure of the use of tin, tantalum, tungsten, and gold sourced from the Democratic Republic of Congo and its neighbors. For issuers on the US exchange, both sections will require implementation of processes and procedures to audit, monitor, and issue the required reports. Interestingly, in both cases, one commissioner took exception to the use of securities laws to achieve social policy goals. However, both rules were passed, and thus efforts to increase financial transparency generally and promote human rights, peace, and security in the DRC are now enshrined in US financial regulation. In both cases, companies will have to design policies and procedures to implement, to pursue General License 17 and also the Dodd-Frank Act. Turning the matter to litigation, Haertle and Royal Dutch Shell is an ATS suit currently before the US Supreme Court, and they had a hearing, oral hearings on Monday of this week. And if the court finds in favor of the plaintiffs, then exposure to US courts for alleged human rights abuses become an increasingly real risk. If the court finds in favor of the respondents, however, claims will continue to be brought, but within a more conventional legal framework and in the jurisdiction where the company or its parent is incorporated or has a place of business. Companies are watching Haertle and Royal Dutch Shell very carefully, very closely. The Global Reporting Initiative is another framework, is voluntary, has increasingly become a standard by which sustainability reports are constructed and corporate behavior is analyzed. The current version, 3.1, is under review, and specific working groups are developing version 4. But according to the GRI, version 3.1 is the most comprehensive sustainability reporting guidance for human rights, local community impacts, and gender available today. Implementing the policies and processes and executing against these processes and policies to withstand stakeholder scrutiny is already a real challenge for 3.1. G4, version 4, will only increase those challenges. And finally, the guiding principles on business and human rights. Again, voluntary. However, as with many of these initiatives, such as the UN Global Compact, there is an underlying expectation of implementation. And while the guidelines offer some color as to what is expected of a business to respect human rights, we really return to where we began, which is the need for a business unit to understand what human rights actually means. And how does each business unit within an organization integrate human rights into its operations? And how do business leaders articulate their contribution to creating sustainable value? So to bring my presentation to a conclusion, business schools house the brightest, liveliest, and most open of minds. And given the opportunity, they are capable of applying their intellect and specialist skills from wherever they come from, whether it's finance, IT, sales, marketing, etc., or HR, to the challenges associated with what were once voluntary but are increasingly becoming mandatory commitments. Business students will return to their companies or their home country armed with the significance and value of respecting human rights. They will be more capable of justifying the investment in human rights and quantifying its contribution to the bottom line. In so doing, they will support social progress, they will improve standards of life, both of which are good for business. And with that, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Tom, for your presentation. We have Anthony at another location now, and so we're trying to patch him in so that he can give his presentation. So, Anthony, why don't you try talking? We hope we have you on the line right now. And we're not hearing him, so we're going to try another way of getting in touch. Thank you for holding on. It'll be just 1 minute. Okay, Anthony, we have you on the line.
Okay, can everyone hear me? I will proceed. I cannot see what slide everyone else is seeing, but I will simply indicate when we should advance the slide. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Jonas, for organizing this call with PRME. Hello, everyone. My name is Anthony Ewing. Since 2001, I have taught transnational business and human rights at Columbia in New York, first at the business school and more recently at the law school. At Columbia, I have also helped to organize a forum for individuals teaching business and human rights worldwide. I'm also a member of the Human Rights Working Group of the UN Global Compact, and I advise companies on corporate responsibility and other matters at Logos Consulting Group in New York. My topic today is teaching business and human rights, and I want to emphasize 3 points in my remarks. First, demand for management education on business and human rights issues is growing. Second, teaching business and human rights presents a number of common challenges wherever it is taught. And third, business and human rights education can be integrated in business school curricula in a number of ways. Next slide, recent developments. So Tom has already mentioned a number of key recent developments. Over the past decade, business and human rights has emerged as a distinct field within corporate responsibility, a field that, of course, has been developing rapidly. I'd just like to highlight developments along two dimensions, standards and business practice. With regard to standards, of course, the UN framework and guiding principles on business and human rights are key developments. The framework and guiding principles have importantly forged a common language and consensus among all actors at the intersection of business and human rights. And these standards have essentially set the business and human rights agenda going forward. Notably, the framework clarifies and elaborates the state responsibility to protect human rights, the corporate responsibility to respect human rights, which is more than just not committing abuses, and finally, the need to provide remedies to individuals whose rights are affected by business activity. At the same time, a number of leading companies have been advancing best practice in this area. Companies are adopting explicit policies on human rights. And in fact, hundreds of companies now have adopted human rights policies. Of course, that number of companies represents a very small percentage of all transnational corporations. Companies are conducting human rights due diligence to learn how their operations, activities, and relationships potentially impact human rights. Companies are exploring ways to manage potential human rights impacts ahead of time, both with existing management tools like risk management processes, and they're creating and experimenting with new ones. And finally, companies are measuring and reporting on their human rights impacts, finding ways to demonstrate to the stakeholders that matter to them that they are meeting their responsibility to respect human rights. Next slide. Because of these developments and other developments like ongoing and continuing pressure for accountability, demand for management education on business and human rights is growing among students, within companies, and even at universities. Students in all disciplines are increasingly aware of corporate responsibility and often are familiar already with the potential human rights impact of specific industries and even specific companies. Demand for courses that address the human rights challenges facing companies is strong and accelerating. Among managers in the field are seeking to understand business and human rights issues. Increasingly, multinational companies like Nestle, like GE, are conducting widespread in-house corporate training on human rights issues, developed primarily and largely internally. And more individuals are teaching this subject at universities. I mentioned that last year, Columbia began hosting a workshop for instructors teaching business and human rights. Participants gathered in the first session last year to share syllabi and teaching strategies and to discuss common challenges. And in fact, that first workshop led to a second meeting, but it has also led to an online teaching forum that has grown to include more than 80 individuals teaching business and human rights in some form at some 50 institutions worldwide. Courses are now being taught at law schools, schools of public policy, and indeed many business schools worldwide. Next slide. Of course, teaching business and human rights presents a number of common challenges wherever it is taught and to whomever it is taught. Key questions are, where should the subject fit in the existing curriculum? What should be taught in a particular course? And of course, what's the most effective way to teach it? It can be difficult to find a place for an emerging multidisciplinary subject like business and human rights within traditional academic departments. Should business and human rights be taught as a discrete course? Should it be integrated throughout the curriculum? Should it be an elective or part of the core coursework? These questions face faculty seeking to add the subject to their curriculum. Once the course exists, what should it cover? What should be in the syllabus? A frequent discussion among teachers is whether we've now reached a point already where it could be a core business and human rights curriculum followed by electives. And especially over the past decade, the available content and topics have exploded. In my own course, whereas 10 years ago when I started teaching business and human rights, I devoted much more time in my syllabus to theory and concepts and less time to examples of corporate best practice because there were relatively few publicly available examples at the time. Today, fortunately, there's a growing inventory of publicly available best practice. And in fact, that section of my syllabus has expanded, forcing me to make decisions about what topics to leave out. Finally, what is the most effective way to teach business and human rights? And this has been a subject of keen interest at our workshop of instructors. Teachers are using all kinds of methods, case method, lecture, group exercises, role-playing, and simulations. Typically, it's a mixture of these techniques and methodologies that keep students most engaged. One learning from instructors is that it's very important to keep current. Current cases and materials help to keep students engaged. Fortunately, there's a growing number of available business and human rights cases. One session in our last workshop was devoted to teaching cases from the internet communication and telecom sector, which is producing some very interesting business and human rights cases. You can go back and compare and contrast Yahoo's approach in China to Google's approach in China, and even current examples contrasting the corporate approaches of managing human rights impacts of entities like Facebook and the cell provider Vodafone more recently during the Arab Spring. Next slide. Now, how does one teach human rights to business students and to managers? A few lessons have emerged from my interactions and discussions with others who are teaching this subject correctly. Let me just highlight four. First, engage skeptics early on by directly addressing the role of business in society. I find that opening my course, even at the law school, with different perspectives on how to define corporate responsibilities, from the traditional orthodox economic perspective, a la Milton Friedman, to stakeholder perspectives, to current versions of the business case for corporate responsibility, is an effective way to engage students from the outset. And then throughout the rest of the semester, I can refer back to our competing definitions of corporate responsibility, and I can place human rights within the broader context of corporate responsibility. My second lesson is the value of framing issues from the perspective of corporate managers. And constantly, no matter what the topic, issue, or theme of the class is, I'm always seeking to place students in the shoes of corporate managers that have to make real-time decisions with limited resources, financial capacity, expertise, and otherwise. Another key valuable tool is translating the language of human rights into the language of business. And this issue of translation is a topic that comes up frequently among those of us teaching business and human rights. In my law class, I'm constantly reframing questions to put students in their future roles of business counsel. So I'm asking students, how would you make the business case for proposed action? How would you explain human rights standards to a CEO with no legal training? How would you describe the elements of an effective corporate human rights program to a general counsel that hasn't paid attention to the issue previously? Finally, I'd just like to highlight an effective approach, which is to emphasize the decision-making consequences of business decisions, and this goes to the issue in the field of business and human rights of unintended consequences. Pushing students to ask the next question, okay, if I decide this, what are some of the potential human rights impacts that I have to consider next? And one example I've been teaching for a while, the case of the voluntary program to eliminate child labor in the Pakistani soccer ball industry. An important unintended consequence in that case when stitching centers were created to register the ages of soccer ball stitchers in local villages, it had the unintended consequence of disenfranchising adult female workers who couldn't work outside of the home because for cultural reasons. And a second-order solution was female-only stitching centers. Next slide. So what are some of the opportunities for management, education, and institutions like business schools? I think business and human rights education can be integrated in business school curricula in a number of ways. There's an important opportunity for leading business schools to develop new courses, both discrete courses explicitly on business and human rights topics, and also importantly, integrating business and human rights issues across traditional disciplines. A first incremental step is to start using the language of business and human rights. And we're fortunate to have now a consensus language. Begin by using some of the common language of the UN framework and guiding principles on business and human rights. Familiarize students with that language and also with best practices and tools that are already being employed by a limited number, granted, but by leading companies. And I'd also highlight significant, if not vast, research opportunities in this field to put some academic rigor behind a lot of the issues like metrics and the values in the enterprise of adopted best practices. Final slide. I'll close with this final thought, and I'm anxious to hear comments and questions from the audience. I think, to me at least, it's clear that students preparing now for careers in business law and government should and are expecting universities to equip them to understand and navigate the business and human rights landscape. I suspect their future employers, like Hickey's organization, will expect nothing less. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions and comments.
So thank you very much, Anthony, for that. I would ask you, Anthony, just to stay on the line as we go into the question and answer session. So we have about 10 minutes, and we would like to open up the conversation to questions. I noticed a few of you have raised your hands using the online interface. We will take your questions. I want to take one moment to recognize Lauren Gula, who's here with us today from the United Nations Global Compact Human Rights team. So as we get to questions, I would like to ask her very briefly to speak to the approach of the Global Compact in relation to human rights. So she's just going to take one moment to give us some ideas, and then we will take your questions. Thank you.
Hi everyone. Thanks so much. I certainly don't want to take up too much time given that we only have about 10 minutes left. But first of all, I just want to thank Prime so much for organizing this. It certainly complements the work that we're doing at the Global Compact on human rights. It's very interesting. Human rights remains one of the most challenging areas for business. We hear this every year in our implementation survey. But it is encouraging that increasingly companies are looking at human rights and prioritizing human rights and wondering how they can better implement the Global Compact's human rights principles, which call on companies to both support and respect human rights and to avoid complicity in human rights abuses. And then, of course, as mentioned, the guiding principles were launched in 2011 and have helped to elaborate the conceptual and operational meaning of the Global Compact's human rights principles. However, what the various elements of the guiding principles mean in practice for business has yet to be fully fleshed out. So there's still lots of opportunities for learning and dissemination of information, and as noted, building the business case for this, and also teaching future leaders what this means and hoping that it's carried forward. So again, thanks so much to Prime for doing this, and we're very eager to learn where this work's going to go. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Lauren. So, like I said, I noticed there are at least a few hands up. I'm going to begin with the first hand that I saw, and it's Akiko Shigemoto. Akiko, I'm going to unmute you so that you can share your question with the speakers. Okay, why don't you go ahead? We can hear you.
Did I raise my hand? I'm not sure. Sorry, I don't have any questions for the time being.
Sure. Well, thank you. I'll unmute you and we'll go to the next. So it looks like the few hands that were up have gone down. I'll give you a moment to raise your hand if you have one. I'm noticing Carolyn Roberts. So Carolyn, I'm going to unmute you. Carolyn, you're with us.
Hello, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hello, great. Thank you, that's very interesting. Just one thing I wanted to pick up on is that you mentioned designing appropriate working conditions for workers and importantly accommodating cultural festivities and respecting religious observance. That's an area of particular interest to me given the latest cases that have gone to the European Court of Human Rights in the UK. I just wondered if anybody could speak a bit more about that and how important that is to get religious and belief sort of protected within the business environment.
Sure. Thank you, Carolyn. Let me turn that question over to Tom because he's indicated that he'd be interested in answering it. Tom?
Yes. Hi. Thanks for the question. I mean, it's an interesting one, and we, Hess is active in sort of 25, 26 countries around the world, and in a range of different, each of which have different cultural and religious observances. And this is very important. We have, we look to have a national workforce where we are in the world. We need to attract the best people we can wherever we are in the world. We, as all other businesses, are in, trying to do the very best, and we believe that's done by local national workforce. So it's very important to respect cultural, religious, festive occasions, to respect all of them, and to ensure people may have a place to pray, a place to worship, that they are free to enjoy particular cultural festivities that are coming up at the time. And particularly a country like Malaysia, which I had the privilege of living in for 4 years, we were respecting Muslim, Christian, Hindu, Thai festivities, Chinese festivities. There are a whole range of festivities that we enjoyed and accommodated, and frankly, it made the workplace a lot more enjoyable and a lot more efficient as a result.
Great. Thank you, Tom. Looking for more hands now, and it looks like there are a few that are up. So I'd like to go to Maureen Kilgore right now. Maureen, we have you on the line. Can you hear us? Yeah. And can we hear you?
Hi. Thanks for that. I'm actually a chair of one of the working groups for PRIME. It's the Gender Equality Working Group, so I'm just enjoying this so much. I also teach a course in Business and Human Rights in Canada. Just to respond a little bit to what Carolyn said, I think it's and the first speaker as well. I think it's a double-edged sword also, and I think that's the importance, as Anthony said, of giving students the tools to understand what's happening in business and human rights, because I guess this week we had the recent case of IKEA that airbrushed women from their Saudi Arabian IKEA catalog. And so the identical picture, I don't know if all of you picked up on that, the identical pictures that we would get in a catalog in Canada or Sweden or the United States, the women were airbrushed out of the catalogs. So the goal of that, I guess, was to kind of respect some of the religious / political activities in Saudi Arabia. So I think it's really important that, and it's not easy, I'm not saying it's easy, but I think that's why embedding business and human rights into business school education is really important, because students need to be able to kind of deconstruct exactly what's going on and how do we respect religion and religious rights when these rights collide with other human rights. And I think it's all ambiguous, but I think it's really important. So Anthony, I just wanted to ask how you suggest overcoming reluctance on the part of colleagues or business school deans to try and get them to get on board with this. Thank you.
Anthony, did you hear this question?
I think I heard the question. Thank you, Maureen. Let me start with your last question. I don't have the answer. I avoid many of the issues because I'm adjunct faculty and I'm not a full-time professor. But it is an issue that is raised constantly by both part-time and full-time faculty. I think a lot is institution-specific, and you really have to, if you're looking to start a new course or expand an existing course, find some champion on the faculty, and it could be in one department in one place, and it could be in a different department in another place. But there's no easy answer. But to your other point, Maureen, I thank you for raising the issue of providing students with tools, and that IKEA case is an interesting new case, and it's providing them the tools of very importantly, and not only do I try to force the non-business people to think like business people, but force the business people to understand exactly what the core, widely accepted international human rights standards are as one tool, but also broadening out to, back to that discussion of corporate responsibility, if IKEA had asked itself the question, are we meeting our stakeholders' expectations broadly? That might have been a different prism through which to understand that case.
Just I'd like to just add something from, again, why I think the value of business schools tackling this issue can feed directly into business. These types of issues, come up across the entire spectrum of business, and there may be operations in a country where you don't have lawyers or maybe HR staff or corporate or CSR specialists. So I think it's so important that operational people, other managers across the entire spectrum of the business are aware of these issues, and therefore they can anticipate them, they can understand them, they can accommodate them, and they can ask the right questions at the right time in order to arrive at a solution that is appropriate to meet not only the local expectations, the business expectations, and the stakeholder expectations.
Thank you, Tom, for adding that. So I'm not seeing any other hands up, but I would like to raise one more point that we initiated at the beginning. From our perspective here at Prime, we're interested in seeing if the Prime community would like to continue working on this issue of business and human rights. If there is sufficient interest, this might be an opportunity for us to gather together a working group to continue to discuss and perhaps pursue this in more definite terms. So on your screen right now, you have our website. We'd encourage you to go to the website and to look around, particularly to look under the tab working groups, just to see in the past what some of our other working groups have put together, and also to see more generally what our program is if you aren't already familiar with it. You also have our email address here. It's primesecretariat@unglobalcompact.org. And if you are indeed interested, or if you know somebody else who's interested, a colleague, a coworker, other people you've met through your work, we'd encourage you to pass on this email address to them and go ahead and drop us an email, and we'll be able to get back to you and in turn gauge interest in this particular area. I'm going to hand it over to Jonas just to close up the webinar. We appreciate you taking your time for us this morning, and even for showing patience with our technological issues at the beginning. So here's Jonas for a closing word.
Great. Thank you, Jed. And I just wanted to really emphasize, I mean, if there is a particular interest from the Prime community or other stakeholders, please really feel free to contact us directly, because we are very eager to hear and to see kind of how we can drive forward that topic. I know also there is keen interest from our colleagues in Global Compact to see how we can do that. In closing, really thank you both to our co-presenters, Anthony on the phone, Tom, and of course also from Lauren, for Lauren to participate in this call. Everybody who has helped us and has listened into this call as well. We wish you a great rest of the morning or afternoon wherever you are, and hope to hear from you very soon. So thanks and goodbye.